The snowflakes fell thick and heavy that Christmas Eve of 1883, turning Wilcox, Arizona into something straight out of a dream, though most folks would have called it a nightmare given how rare such weather was in these parts. Thomas Irwin had been riding for 3 days straight, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air as his horse picked its way carefully through the mounting drifts, when he heard a sound that made him pull hard on the reins and sit stock still in his saddle, listening. Someone was crying, the sound muffled by the falling snow but unmistakable in its heartbreak. He urged his bay gelding forward, following the sound until he spotted her, a young woman huddled against a rocky outcropping, her dark dress soaked through, her hair plastered to her face by melting snow. She was shaking so hard he could see it from 20 feet away, her arms wrapped around herself as she sobbed into her knees. Thomas dismounted quickly, his boots crunching in the fresh powder as he approached with his hands visible, not wanting to startle her. "Madam," he called out gently. "Madam, you are going to freeze to death out here." She looked up at him with eyes so blue they reminded him of summer skies, which seemed particularly cruel given their current circumstances. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge, and when she tried to speak, her teeth chattered so violently she could barely form words. Please, Jay, just leave me. I haven't nothing left." Thomas shrugged off his heavy sheepskin coat without a second thought, draping it around her trembling shoulders. "That is not happening. Come on now, let me help you up." He extended his hand, noting the way her fingers were turning white at the tips. She had been out here far too long already. "You don't understand," she managed through her shivers. "Everyone is gone. My family, my home, there is nothing." He crouched down beside her, his brown eyes meeting hers with an intensity that cut through her despair. "Listen to me. No more tears, only joy from now. I do not know what happened to you, but I promise you this: you are not alone anymore. Now take my hand before we both turn into ice statues, because I am not leaving without you." Something in his voice, in the absolute certainty of his words, made her reach for him. Her hand was like ice in his, but he held it firmly as he pulled her to her feet. She swayed dangerously, and he caught her around the waist, supporting most of her weight as he guided her toward his horse. "What is your name?" he asked, trying to keep her talking, keep her conscious. Delilah. "Delilah Sinclair," she whispered. "Well, Miss Sinclair, I am Thomas Irwin, and I am going to get you somewhere warm." "Can you ride?" She nodded weakly, though he doubted she could stay upright on her own. He mounted first, then pulled her up in front of him, wrapping his arms around her to keep her steady and share what warmth he had left. She collapsed against his chest, still shaking, and he could feel the cold radiating off her body. "There is a line shack about a mile from here," he said, more to himself than to her. "We can shelter there until this storm passes." He kicked the gelding into a careful trot, one arm locked around Delilah's waist while the other held the reins. The wind picked up as they rode, howling through the sparse pines and whipping the snow into blinding sheets. Thomas had to rely more on his horse's instincts than his own vision, trusting the animal to find the path. Delilah had stopped shaking, which worried him more than the trembling had it meant her body was shutting down, giving up the fight against the cold. "Stay with me, Delilah," he said urgently, jostling her slightly. "Tell me where you are from. Tell me about your family." "San Francisco," she mumbled. "Came here 6 months ago. Papa thought Arizona would be good for business. He was a banker, had a building in town." "Past tense?" Thomas asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "They are all dead." Her voice was flat now, emotionless with shock. "My parents, my little sister Emma. The fever took them within a week of each other. I buried Emma 3 days ago. She was only 14. Thomas tightened his hold on her, his heart aching at the raw grief in her voice. "I am so sorry." The bank took everything to settle Papa's debts. I had nowhere to go, nothing left. I just started walking, and then the snow came, and I thought maybe it was a mercy. Maybe I could just go to sleep and be with them again. That is not mercy, that is giving up, Thomas said firmly. And you are stronger than that, Delilah Sinclair, I can tell. She did not respond, and he felt a spike of panic. Delilah, stay awake, talk to me. What did you do in San Francisco? Did you have friends there? I played piano, she said after a long moment. Taught music lessons to children, I loved it. There, see, you have skills, things to offer. Arizona needs music teachers too, I would wager. Through the driving snow, Thomas finally spotted the dark shape of the lined shack, a small structure built to shelter ranch hands during roundups or bad weather. Relief flooded through him as he guided his horse to the crude stable attached to the side. He dismounted carefully, then reached up to pull Delilah down, alarmed at how limp she had become. He half carried her to the door, kicking it open and guiding her inside. The shack was basic, a pot-bellied stove, a rough bed frame with a worn mattress, a table and 2 chairs. But it was shelter, and that was all that mattered. Thomas deposited Delilah in one of the chairs and immediately set about building a fire in the stove, grateful that whoever had used the shack last had left wood stacked beside it. His hands worked quickly, striking a match and coaxing the kindling to catch. Once the flames were going strong, he added larger pieces of wood and then turned his attention back to Delilah. She was slumped in the chair, her eyes half closed, her wet dress clinging to her frame. Delilah, you need to get out of those wet clothes, he said, keeping his voice gentle but firm. You will never warm up otherwise. She looked at him with glazed eyes, not really seeing him. Thomas cursed under his breath and looked around the small space. He had a change of clothes in his saddlebag, a spare shirt and long johns, not much but better than what she had. He retrieved them quickly, then moved back to her side. I am going to step outside for a few minutes, he said. Change into these. They will be too big, but they are dry. Can you do that? She nodded slightly, and he hoped she actually understood. He grabbed a blanket from the bed and went back out into the storm, tending to his horse and giving Delilah privacy. The gelding was grateful for the shelter of the lean-to, and Thomas rubbed him down quickly before throwing a blanket over him. The animal had saved both their lives tonight by finding the shack in the blizzard. After what he judged was enough time, Thomas stomped back inside, brushing snow from his hair. Delilah had managed to change into his shirt, which hung nearly to her knees, and was attempting to pull on the long johns beneath it. Her movements were slow and uncoordinated, but the fact that she had managed at all was a good sign. Here, sit down, he said, guiding her to the chair closest to the stove. He draped another blanket around her shoulders, then hung her wet dress and undergarments on nails by the stove to dry. The action felt oddly intimate despite the dire circumstances, and he felt heat rise to his cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. Thomas busied himself checking the supplies in the shack. Someone had left coffee, beans, and some hardtack in a sealed tin. He put coffee on to boil and tried to assess their situation. The storm showed no signs of letting up, which meant they would be here at least until morning, possibly longer. He had enough food for a few days if they were careful, and there was a water barrel that had collected rain or snow. He poured coffee when it was ready, pressing the warm cup into Delilah's hands. Drink this, slowly. She obeyed, wrapping her fingers around the tin cup and sipping carefully. Some color was starting to return to her face, and her shivering had resumed, which he took as a positive sign her body was fighting again. Why did you help me? She asked suddenly, her voice hoarse. You do not know me. I could be anyone. Thomas pulled the other chair closer to the stove and sat down, cradling his own cup. Because it was the right thing to do, and because I meant what I said out there, no one deserves to die alone in the snow on Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve. Delilah looked around as if just remembering. Last year we had a huge tree in our parlor. Emma strung popcorn for hours, making chains. Mama made her special apple cake. Papa gave me a new music book. Her voice broke. And now they are all gone, and I am here in a shack in the middle of nowhere with a stranger. I know it does not feel like it now, but you are going to survive this, Thomas said. The grief, the loss, it will not go away, but it will become something you can carry instead of something that crushes you. I promise. She studied him over the rim of her cup. You speak as if you know. My mother died when I was 12, he said quietly. Cholera outbreak in Kansas. My father lasted another year before his heart gave out. I think he just did not want to live without her. My older brother raised me after that, but he was killed in a range war 5 years ago. So yes, I know something about loss. How do you bear it? Delilah whispered. By living. By finding things worth waking up for each morning. By helping people when I can and trying to make some kind of difference in this hard world. He set his cup down and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I am not going to lie to you and say it will be easy, but I meant what I said. No more tears, only joy from now. Or at least we can work toward joy, one day at a time. Delilah was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames visible through the grate in the stove door. I do not even know where to start. You start by finishing that coffee and getting warm. Then you rest. Tomorrow we figure out the next step. That is all any of us can ever do, take the next step, then the one after that. She nodded slowly, and they fell into a companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. Thomas watched her from the corner of his eye, noting the delicate bone structure of her face, the way the firelight caught golden threads in her dark hair. She was beautiful, even bedraggled and grief-stricken, and he felt something stir in his chest that had nothing to do with simple compassion. He pushed the feeling aside firmly. The woman had just lost everything. The last thing she needed was some cowboy developing feelings for her when she was at her most vulnerable. Still, he could not quite stop himself from wanting to protect her, to see her smile, to chase away the haunted look in her eyes. You should sleep, he said eventually. Take the bed. I will keep the fire going and keep watch. I cannot take the only bed, Delilah protested weakly. You can and you will. I have slept in worse places than a chair, believe me. He stood and helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. The bed was only a few steps away, and he eased her down onto the mattress, pulling the remaining blankets over her. Thomas, she said as he turned away. Yes, thank you, for not leaving me out there, for caring whether I lived or died. He looked back at her, seeing the shine of tears in her eyes despite his proclamation about no more crying. You can thank me by fighting, Delilah, by not giving up. Can you do that? I can try, she whispered. That is all anyone can ask. He returned to his chair by the stove, settling in for a long night. Delilah fell asleep quickly, exhaustion claiming her, but Thomas could hear her restless movements, the small sounds of distress she made in her dreams. Each one was like a knife to his heart. He kept the fire burning hot, adding wood throughout the night, and watched the snow continue to fall outside the single small window. Sometime in the darkest hours before dawn, Delilah cried out sharply, sitting bolt upright in bed. Emma, no, please. Thomas was at her side in an instant. You are safe. It was a dream. She looked at him wildly, not quite awake, tears streaming down her face. I could not save her. I tried everything, but the fever would not break. She was so small, so scared. I know, I know. Acting on instinct, Thomas sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her into his arms, letting her sob against his chest. She clung to him like a drowning person clings to a life raft, her whole body shaking with the force of her grief. He held her, one hand smoothing over her hair, murmuring wordless comfort. It felt natural, right, even though he had only met her hours before. When her sobs finally subsided into hiccups and then quiet sniffles, he eased her back down onto the pillows. "I am sorry," she said, her voice thick. "You must think I am pathetic. I think you are human, and I think you have been trying to be strong alone for too long." He brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his fingers lingering perhaps a moment too long. "But you are not alone anymore. Remember." "No more tears, only joy from now," she repeated, almost like a prayer. "That is right. Now sleep. I am right here if you need me." This time, when she closed her eyes, she seemed to rest more peacefully, and Thomas returned to his vigil by the fire. The storm raged on outside, but inside the small shack, something fragile and precious was beginning to take root. He could feel it, an awareness of her that went beyond sympathy, beyond simple attraction. It was the beginning of something that could either be wonderful or disastrous, and he had no idea which way it would fall. Dawn broke gray and white, the snow still falling but less violently than before. Thomas made breakfast from the supplies on hand: beans and coffee and hardtack softened in bean juice. It was not much, but it was hot and filling. Delilah woke to the smell of coffee, sitting up slowly and pushing her tangled hair back from her face. "Good morning," Thomas said, keeping his tone light. "How are you feeling? Sore, cold, alive?" She managed a small smile. "Better than I expected, actually." "That is the spirit. Come eat something." They sat across from each other at the small table, the intimacy of the situation not lost on either of them. In the daylight, Thomas could see that Delilah's eyes were red-rimmed but clear, and there was a set to her jaw that had not been there the night before. She was fighting, just as he had asked. "Tell me about yourself," Delilah said as she ate. "You said your brother raised you. What did you do after he died?" "Drifted for a while," Thomas admitted. "Did ranch work wherever I could find it. Drove cattle from Texas to Kansas 1 year. That was an experience. Eventually ended up down here in Arizona. The territory suits me: wide open spaces, room to breathe. I have been working on the Triple Bar Ranch about 15 miles north of Wilcox for the past 2 years. Is that where you were headed when you found me?" "Actually, no. I was heading into town for the holiday. The foreman gave me a few days off, and I thought I would see if Wilcox had any Christmas festivities. But the storm caught me earlier than I expected." He grinned. "Lucky for you, I suppose." "Lucky for me," she agreed softly. "What will you do now?" "About your plans, I mean. I have already disrupted your holiday. Plans change. Right now, my plan is to wait out this storm, then get you somewhere safe and warm. After that, we will figure things out." "You keep saying we," Delilah pointed out. Thomas met her eyes squarely. "Is that a problem?" She shook her head slowly. "No. Actually, it is the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a long time, but you barely know me. Why would you involve yourself in my troubles?" He considered how to answer that. The truth was, he did not fully understand it himself. Something about her called to him, made him want to shelter her, protect her, make her smile again. It was more than duty, more than simple compassion. But it was too soon to say any of that, too soon to even fully admit it to himself. "Maybe I am just a sucker for damsels in distress," he said lightly. "Or maybe I recognize someone who needs a friend, and I happen to have a little experience and some connections that might help. Does it matter why? I suppose not." Delilah wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, staring into its depths. "I need to find work, a place to stay. I have no money, no references anymore. Papa's creditors took everything, including my piano. I do not even have proper clothes beyond what I was wearing yesterday." "We will address all of that," Thomas assured her. "Wilcox is not a huge town, but it is growing. There might be families who want music lessons for their children, and as for a place to stay, there is a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patricia Hoffman. She is a good woman, fair and decent. I am sure we can work something out with her." "On what grounds?" "I have nothing to pay her with. Leave that to me. I have some money saved up and I can vouch for you. Once you find work, you can pay me back if it makes you feel better. But money is not the point here, Delilah. The point is getting you on your feet again." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Because someone was kind to me once when I needed it most," Thomas said simply. "My brother could have sent me to an orphanage or left me to fend for myself after our father died. Instead, he sacrificed his own plans, his own life really, to raise me. He taught me that we take care of our own and we help those who need help. I am just trying to live up to his example." Tears welled up in Delilah's eyes again, but she blinked them back. "No more tears, only joy from now," she said, almost fiercely. "That is right. Although you know it is okay to cry sometimes. Grief needs an outlet. I am just saying you do not have to let it drown you." They spent the rest of the morning and into the afternoon in the shack, waiting for the storm to break. They really talked, sharing stories about their lives, their families, their dreams. Thomas learned that Delilah had wanted to open her own music school in San Francisco, that she loved Mozart but secretly preferred popular ballads, that she missed the ocean terribly since moving to Arizona. Delilah learned that Thomas had never been to school but had taught himself to read from his mother's Bible, that he was 26 years old and had never been married, that he loved the ranch life but sometimes wondered what it would be like to settle down, have a family of his own. The conversation flowed easily between them, comfortable despite their brief acquaintance. Thomas found himself laughing at her dry observations about frontier life, and he was rewarded several times by the sight of her smile, small and tentative but genuine. By mid-afternoon, the snow had finally stopped, leaving the world buried under 2 feet of pristine white. Thomas ventured outside to check on his horse and survey the landscape. The temperature was rising, which meant the unusual snow would not last long in Arizona, but for now it transformed the harsh desert terrain into something magical. "Come see this," he called to Delilah, and she appeared in the doorway, still wrapped in his 2 large clothes and a blanket. She gasped at the sight. "It is beautiful." "It is. Kind of makes you understand why people write poems about snow, does it not?" They stood together in the doorway, shoulders nearly touching, watching the sun break through the clouds and set the snow sparkling like a field of diamonds. Delilah shivered, but Thomas suspected it was not entirely from the cold. There was an awareness between them now, a current of something unnamed but undeniable. "We should be able to make it to town by nightfall if we leave soon," Thomas said, forcing himself to focus on practical matters. "The going will be slow, but the main road will be easier to follow than the trails I was using yesterday." "I should put my dress back on," Delilah said reluctantly. "Even if it is damp, keep the shirt. Wear the dress over it for warmth and modesty. It will be cold riding double." They prepared to leave, Thomas packing up what supplies they could carry and banking the fire in the stove. Before they left, Delilah paused in the middle of the small room, looking around. "What is it?" Thomas asked. "I was just thinking that this place probably saved my life. I should be grateful for it, even though it is just a rough shack in the middle of nowhere." "It is more than that now," Thomas said. "It is the place where you decided to live instead of die. That makes it special." She looked at him with those impossibly blue eyes. "You have a poet's soul, Thomas Irwin, even if you are dressed like a cowboy." He felt heat rise to his cheeks. "I am a cowboy through and through, but I suppose even cowboys can appreciate beautiful things when they see them." He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, and he saw understanding dawn in her expression. He was not just talking about the snow or the shack. The ride to Wilcox took nearly 4 hours, the horse picking its way carefully through the deep snow. Delilah rode in front of Thomas again, and he kept one arm wrapped firmly around her waist. She had stopped protesting the familiarity of the position, leaning back against him for warmth and balance. He tried not to think about how perfectly she fit against him, how right it felt to hold her. They talked less during the ride, both focused on staying warm and keeping the horse on track. But the silence between them was comfortable, companionable. Delilah pointed out a hawk circling overhead at one point, and Thomas showed her where a jackrabbit had left tracks in the snow before darting back to cover. The sun was setting behind them, painting the snow pink and gold, when they finally saw the buildings of Wilcox rising from the desert floor. Smoke rose from chimneys and lights glowed in windows, welcoming and warm. "Civilization," Delilah murmured. "I was not sure I would ever see it again." "I told you I would get you somewhere safe," Thomas reminded her. "You did. You have kept every promise you made to me." He guided his horse down the main street, noting that most businesses were closed for the holiday. A few people were out despite the snow, and they stared at Thomas and Delilah with open curiosity. He nodded to those he knew but did not stop to explain. Time enough for that later. The boarding house was at the far end of town, a 2-story structure painted white with green shutters. Warm light spilled from the windows, and Thomas could hear the sound of voices and laughter from inside. He dismounted, then helped Delilah down, noting the way she winced when her feet hit the ground. She had been in the saddle for hours without proper riding boots. "Wait here," he said, then reconsidered. "Actually, come with me. You will freeze standing out here, and Mrs. Hoffman should meet you anyway." He led Delilah up the steps and knocked firmly on the door. It opened almost immediately to reveal a plump woman in her 50s with graying hair and sharp but kind eyes. "Thomas Irwin," Mrs. Hoffman exclaimed. "I heard you were out in that storm." "Thank the Lord you made it back safely. And who is this?" "This is Miss Delilah Sinclair," Thomas said. "She needs a room and some help. I can explain more inside if you have a moment." Mrs. Hoffman took one look at Delilah's bedraggled appearance and pale face and immediately stepped aside. "Of course, come in, come in. You both look half frozen. Come into the parlor where it is warm." The boarding house interior was cozy and clean, decorated with simple but tasteful furnishings. The smell of baking bread and some kind of meat stew filled the air, making Thomas's stomach growl despite the beans he had eaten earlier. Mrs. Hoffman ushered them into a small private parlor off the main hall and closed the door, giving them privacy from the other boarders. "Now then, what is going on?" Thomas let Delilah tell her story, watching Mrs. Hoffman's expression shift from curiosity to sympathy to determination. When Delilah finished, her voice barely above a whisper, Mrs. Hoffman reached out and took her hands. "You poor dear. What a terrible thing to endure, and at Christmas time too. Of course you can stay here. I have a room on the 2nd floor that is vacant. As for payment, we can work something out. I always need help with the cooking and cleaning if you are willing to work for your board until you find proper employment." "I would be grateful for any work," Delilah said earnestly. "I promise I will not be a burden." "Nonsense. We all need help sometimes." Mrs. Hoffman looked at Thomas. "You did a good thing, bringing her here. Your brother would be proud." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. Mrs. Hoffman had known his brother, had even taken Thomas in for a few weeks after the funeral when he could not face going back to the ranch. "Thank you, madam. No thanks necessary." Now, Miss Sinclair, let us get you upstairs and into some proper clothes. I think I have some things that might fit you, at least temporarily. Thomas, you are welcome to stay for supper if you like. I made extra, it being Christmas Eve and all. I would appreciate that, thank you, Mrs. Hoffman led Delilah upstairs, leaving Thomas alone in the parlor. He sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had kept him going through the rescue and the long ride was wearing off, and he felt every one of his 26 years plus a few more. But beneath the exhaustion was something else, a sense of rightness, of having done something important. He had saved Delilah's life, yes, but it felt like more than that. It felt like the beginning of something, though he could not quite put his finger on what. He must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, Mrs. Hoffman was gently shaking his shoulder. "Thomas, dear, supper is ready, and Miss Sinclair is asking for you." He followed her upstairs to a small but clean room with a bed, wardrobe, washstand, and chair. Delilah was sitting on the edge of the bed wearing a simple gray dress that fit her reasonably well, her hair brushed and pinned back. She looked transformed from the half-frozen wraith he had found in the snow, though her eyes still held shadows of grief. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said when he entered, "for everything. I do not know how I can ever repay you. You do not have to repay me, just get better, find your joy again. That is all the payment I need." "Is it?" She stood and crossed to him, looking up into his face. They were close enough that he could see the darker ring around the blue of her irises, smell the lavender soap Mrs. Hoffman must have given her. "You have given me back my life, Thomas. That is not a small thing." "You would have found your way eventually," he said, though he was not entirely sure that was true. "Maybe. Or maybe I would have frozen to death in that snow, given up entirely. But you did not let me. You said no more tears, only joy from now, and you meant it. That kind of certainty, that kind of faith in a stranger, it is extraordinary." "You are not a stranger anymore," Thomas said softly. "I think we passed that point somewhere between the line shack and here. No, I suppose we are not strangers." She reached up and touched his cheek, her fingers feather light. "What are we then, friends?" he suggested, though the word felt inadequate for what was building between them. "Friends," she agreed, but there was a question in her voice, a wondering that matched his own. "Mrs. Hoffman cleared her throat from the doorway, and they sprang apart like guilty children. "Supper is getting cold," she said, her eyes twinkling with amusement, "and we have other guests waiting to eat." Dinner was a lively affair with 8 boarders total, most of them single men who worked various jobs around Wilcox. They were curious about the newcomer but respectful, especially after Mrs. Hoffman made it clear that Delilah had been through a hard time and deserved privacy. The food was excellent beef stew with vegetables, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert, and the conversation flowed easily. Thomas found himself watching Delilah throughout the meal, noting how she gradually relaxed, even smiled at a joke one of the other boarders made. She was resilient, he realized. Badly wounded but not broken. Give her time and the right support and she would flourish again. After dinner, Mrs. Hoffman shooed everyone into the parlor, where she had set up a small Christmas tree decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments. One of the boarders produced a harmonica and began playing carols, and others joined in singing. Delilah sat beside Thomas on the settee, her shoulder pressed against his, and he felt the most profound sense of contentment he had experienced in years. "This is nice," she said quietly under cover of the singing. "I did not think I would ever feel this again, peace, belonging. Thank you for giving me this chance." "You are doing the hard part," Thomas replied. "I just pointed you in the right direction. It is more than that, and you know it." She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "I feel safe with you, Thomas. I know we just met, but I trust you in a way I have not trusted anyone since my father died. Is that strange? If it is, then we are both strange because I feel the same way about you." He said it without thinking, then wondered if he had revealed too much too soon. But Delilah just smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face. "Good. I am glad I am not the only one." The evening wound down eventually, boarders drifting off to their rooms with wishes of Merry Christmas. Mrs. Hoffman tactfully left Thomas and Delilah alone in the parlor for a few more minutes, though she left the door open for propriety's sake. "I should go," Thomas said reluctantly. "I need to get my horse to the livery and find somewhere to sleep myself." "Where will you go? The ranch is too far in this weather. I will probably sleep in the livery with my horse. It will not be the first time." "That seems hardly fair when you have spent the last day taking care of me." "I am used to rough accommodations. Besides, I want to stay close to town for the next few days, make sure you are settling in all right." Delilah stood when he did, walking him to the front door. The hallway was dim, lit by a single lamp, creating an intimate pool of light around them. "Will I see you tomorrow? If you want to." "I want to," she said firmly. "Maybe we could go to church together. Mrs. Hoffman mentioned there is a Christmas service at 10 o'clock. I would like that." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering. "Sleep well, Delilah. You too. And Thomas. Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas." He forced himself to leave, collecting his horse from where he had tied it and leading it through the snowy streets to the livery. The stable master was drunk and cheerful, waving Thomas toward an empty stall and not even asking for payment. Thomas bedded down in the hay next to his gelding, wrapped in his coat and a horse blanket, but he barely felt the cold. His mind was full of blue eyes and a slow dawning smile, of the weight of Delilah in his arms and the trust she had placed in him. He was in danger of falling for her, he realized. Maybe he already had, somewhere between finding her in the snow and watching her laugh at dinner. It was too fast, too intense, and probably the worst possible timing given everything she had been through. But his heart did not seem to care about timing or propriety or anything, except the certainty that Delilah Sinclair was someone special, someone worth taking a chance on. He would have to be careful, take things slow, give her time to heal and decide what she wanted without pressure from him. But as he drifted off to sleep in the cold hay, Thomas allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, what she might want eventually was him. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the snow already beginning to melt under the Arizona sun. Thomas washed up as best he could in the horse trough, changed into his spare shirt, and made his way back to the boarding house. He arrived just as the church bells began to ring, calling the faithful to service. Delilah was waiting on the porch, wearing the same gray dress but with a shawl borrowed from Mrs. Hoffman, and her hair arranged in soft curls around her face. She looked beautiful and fragile and strong all at once, and Thomas felt his heart kick in his chest. "Good morning," she said, smiling as he approached. "Did you sleep well in the livery?" "Well enough. How about you?" "I had nightmares, but I expected that. It will take time." She took his offered arm naturally, as if they had been walking together for years instead of hours. "Mrs. Hoffman was up early making a Christmas feast. She invited you to join us after church, if you have nowhere else to be." "I have nowhere else I would rather be," Thomas said honestly. They walked together to the small whitewashed church at the center of town, joining the stream of families and couples heading to the Christmas service. Inside, the church was decorated with pine boughs and candles, the air filled with the scent of wax and evergreen. They found seats near the back, sliding into the pew side by side. The service was simple but moving, the minister speaking about hope in dark times, about unexpected blessings, about the gift of new beginnings. Thomas felt Delilah's hand find his during the sermon, her fingers lacing through his. He squeezed gently, offering silent support, and she squeezed back. When the congregation rose to sing the final hymn, Delilah's voice soared clear and true above the others, her musical training evident. People turned to look, smiles on their faces, and Thomas felt a surge of pride that made no logical sense. He had no claim on her, no right to feel possessive or proud. But he felt it anyway. After the service, several townspeople approached to introduce themselves or welcome Delilah to Wilcox. Word had already spread about the banker's daughter who had lost everything, and while there was curiosity, there was also genuine kindness. An older couple mentioned they had grandchildren who might benefit from piano lessons. A shop owner offered to extend credit for necessities until Delilah got on her feet. A rancher's wife invited both Delilah and Thomas to dinner the following week. By the time they made it back to the boarding house, Delilah was flushed and smiling. "I cannot believe how kind everyone has been. I was so worried about coming into town, about being a charity case. People help their own out here," Thomas said, "and whether you have been here 6 months or 6 days, you are one of us now." The Christmas dinner at the boarding house was magnificent: roast turkey, potatoes, vegetables, pies, and cakes. Mrs. Hoffman had outdone herself, and the boarders and a few invited guests filled the dining room with laughter and conversation. Thomas found himself seated next to Delilah, their shoulders brushing whenever one of them moved, their knees occasionally bumping under the table. It felt domestic, comfortable, like a glimpse of a future he had not dared imagine for himself. He caught Delilah looking at him several times throughout the meal, her expression soft and wondering, and each time his heart stuttered a little. After dinner, as the guests relaxed in the parlor with coffee and brandy, Mrs. Hoffman pulled Thomas aside. "That young woman is half in love with you already," she said bluntly. "What are your intentions, Thomas Irwin?" He blinked, startled by her directness. "Madam, do not madam me. I see the way you look at her, and I see the way she looks at you. But she is vulnerable right now, grieving and alone. If you are just being kind because it is the right thing to do, that is admirable. But if you are developing feelings for her, you need to be honest with yourself about that. She does not need her heart broken on top of everything else." Thomas considered his words carefully. "I like her, Mrs. Hoffman, more than I probably should given that we just met, but I am not going to push her or pressure her. If something develops between us naturally over time, then I will count myself the luckiest man alive. But if she decides she just wants a friend, or that she needs to focus on rebuilding her life alone, I will respect that too." Mrs. Hoffman studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You are a good man, Thomas. Your brother raised you right. Just promise me you will be careful with her. And with your own heart too. Love is a precious thing, but it can hurt like hell when it goes wrong. I promise." He returned to the parlor to find Delilah at the piano Mrs. Hoffman kept in the corner, her fingers moving tentatively over the keys. She was playing a slow, melancholy piece he did not recognize, her eyes closed, lost in the music. The other guests had fallen silent, listening, and when she finished, there was a moment of profound quiet before everyone burst into applause. Delilah opened her eyes, startled, then blushed at the attention. "I apologize, I did not mean to put on a performance, I just missed playing so much." "Do not apologize," Mrs. Hoffman said firmly. "That was beautiful, play more if you like." Delilah launched into a livelier tune, and soon several people were singing along. Thomas watched her transform before his eyes, the music bringing her back to life in a way nothing else had. This was who she was meant to be, surrounded by beauty and joy, creating and sharing and living fully. He wanted to be part of that life. The realization hit him with stunning clarity. He wanted to wake up every morning knowing he would see her smile, wanted to fall asleep every night with her beside him, wanted to build something real and lasting with this woman he barely knew but somehow understood on a soul-deep level. It was insane. It was too fast. It was probably doomed to end in heartbreak. He did not care. The days after Christmas passed in a blur of activity and growing intimacy. Thomas delayed his return to the ranch, sending word to the foreman that he had encountered complications in town and would need a few more days. The foreman, a pragmatic man who had known Thomas for years, sent back a terse reply that amounted to "take your time," which Thomas interpreted as tacit approval. He spent his days helping Delilah settle into life in Wilcox. They walked the town together, Thomas introducing her to people he knew, Delilah gradually building connections and establishing herself. The older couple who had mentioned piano lessons became her first clients, and soon others followed. Within a week, she had 5 students and the promise of more. Mrs. Hoffman continued to let Delilah work for her board, but insisted on paying her a small wage as well, recognizing that Delilah would need money for clothes and other necessities. Thomas tried to help financially, but Delilah was proud and independent, accepting only what she absolutely needed and keeping careful track of every penny so she could pay him back. They fell into a comfortable routine breakfast together at the boarding house, lessons for Delilah during the day while Thomas helped out at various businesses around town to earn his keep, dinners together, and long evening walks regardless of the weather. They talked endlessly, discovering shared opinions on everything from politics to literature, arguing good-naturedly about music versus visual art, laughing at shared jokes and private observations, and always, beneath the friendship and the easy companionship, there was the awareness. The way Thomas's hand lingered at the small of Delilah's back when helping her over rough ground, the way Delilah's fingers brushed his when passing him the salt at dinner, the long looks that spoke of things neither of them was quite ready to voice aloud. It was Mrs. Hoffman who finally forced the issue, about 10 days after Christmas. She cornered Thomas in the hallway after breakfast and spoke bluntly. "You need to either court that girl properly or go back to your ranch and let her heal without you hovering around giving her false hope." Thomas felt heat rise to his face. "I am not hovering. You most certainly are, and do not think I have not noticed how you two look at each other. It is frankly ridiculous that you have not declared yourself yet. What are you waiting for? For the right time, for her to be ready." "She is as ready as she is going to be," Mrs. Hoffman said firmly. "That girl has been through hell, yes, but she is not fragile. She is strong and smart and perfectly capable of deciding what she wants, but she cannot decide if you never give her the option. What if she does not want me that way? What if I am just the man who saved her, and once she is fully on her feet, she realizes she does not need me anymore?" Mrs. Hoffman's expression softened. "Is that what you are afraid of? Oh, Thomas, that girl is in love with you. Anyone with eyes can see it. The question is whether you have the courage to love her back." "I already do," Thomas admitted, the words coming out almost against his will. "I think I have since the moment I found her in the snow." "Then tell her, you foolish man. Life is too short and too uncertain to waste time being cautious about love." That evening, Thomas asked Delilah to go for a walk after dinner, despite the chill in the air. She agreed immediately, wrapping herself in a shawl and taking his arm as they stepped out into the January night. The unusual snow had long since melted, but the air still held a bite that reminded them both of that fateful Christmas Eve. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, heading out of town toward a small rise that overlooked the desert. The sunset was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. They stood together at the top of the rise, Delilah's shoulder pressed against Thomas's arm, watching the light fade. "Delilah," Thomas said finally, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him, her expression open and expectant. "All right. These past 10 days have been the best of my life. Getting to know you, spending time with you, watching you come back to yourself, it has been an honor and a privilege. But I need you to know that my feelings have gone beyond friendship, beyond simple caring." He took a breath, committing himself. "I am falling in love with you, Delilah Sinclair. Maybe I have been since that first moment in the snow. I do not know if that is too fast or too much or completely inappropriate given everything you have been through, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel it." Delilah was quiet for a long moment, her face unreadable in the fading light. Thomas felt his heart hammering against his ribs, fear and hope warring in his chest. Then she reached up and cupped his face with both hands, her thumbs brushing his cheekbones. "It is not too fast," she said softly, "and it is not too much, because I feel the same way. I think I started falling in love with you when you promised me no more tears, only joy from now. You gave me hope when I had none, Thomas. You made me want to live again. And somewhere in the midst of all that, I fell completely, utterly in love with you." Thomas felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. "You mean it?" "I mean it with everything I am." She rose up on her toes, her intention clear, and Thomas met her halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. Her lips were soft against his, and she tasted like the peppermint tea she had drunk with dinner. Thomas wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and deepened the kiss slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not pull away. Instead, she melted against him, her fingers threading through his hair, kissing him back with a passion that matched his own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to do this right." "We can do it right," Delilah agreed. "But we can also be honest about how we feel. I do not want to pretend or play games or hide what is between us." "Neither do I." He kissed her again, softer this time, savoring the miracle of her in his arms. "I love you, Delilah. I love you too, Thomas." They stood together as full darkness fell, holding each other, whispering promises and dreams and hopes for the future. It was the beginning of something real and precious, built on a foundation of crisis and kindness, but growing into something far deeper and more lasting. When they finally returned to the boarding house, walking hand in hand, Mrs. Hoffman took one look at their glowing faces and smiled knowingly. "About time," was all she said, but her eyes were warm with approval. The courtship that followed was unconventional by the standards of the day, but perfect for them. Thomas continued to delay his return to the ranch, though he knew he could not put it off indefinitely. He spent every moment he could with Delilah, accompanying her to church on Sundays, escorting her to her piano lessons, stealing kisses in quiet corners when no one was looking. They talked about the future with increasing seriousness. Thomas wanted to save enough money to start his own small ranch, maybe run a few head of cattle and some horses. Delilah wanted to continue teaching music, maybe eventually open a formal music school. They both wanted a family, children of their own to raise and love. How many? Delilah asked one afternoon as they sat together on the porch of the boarding house, watching the world go by. "Children? I do not know, 3 or 4 maybe. I always wanted a big family, me too. Though I would like to wait a little while before we start. Is that all right?" Thomas turned to look at her, his heart swelling with love. "We have not even talked about marriage yet, and you are already planning our family." "Are we not going to get married?" Delilah asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. "Of course we are," Thomas said firmly. "When you are ready. When we have had time to really know each other, build something solid." "I know you already," Delilah said. "I know you are kind and brave and honest. I know you will do the right thing even when it is hard. I know you make me laugh and feel safe and want to be a better person. What else do I need to know? Where I snore, how grumpy I get before my first cup of coffee, my bad habit of leaving my boots wherever I take them off." She laughed. "I can live with all of that. The question is, can you live with me? I am stubborn and opinionated, and I cannot cook to save my life. I play piano at all hours when inspiration strikes, and I cry at weddings and sometimes at particularly moving pieces of music." "I can absolutely live with all of that," Thomas assured her. "In fact, I am counting on it." "Then ask me." "Ask you what? You know what?" Thomas felt his pulse quicken. "Now, here, why not, unless you are having second thoughts." "No second thoughts. Not a single one." He slid off the bench they were sharing and dropped to one knee on the porch, taking her hand in his. "Delilah Sinclair, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a broke cowboy with more dreams than dollars, and let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you make me?" Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling, her free hand pressed to her heart. "Yes. Yes. Absolutely yes." He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply, not caring that they were in full view of the street and any passing neighbors. When they finally broke apart, Delilah was laughing and crying at the same time. "No more tears, only joy from now," Thomas reminded her gently. "These are happy tears. They do not count." "Fair enough." They were married in early February, barely 6 weeks after they had met. It was a small ceremony at the same church where they had attended Christmas service with Mrs. Hoffman serving as Delilah's matron of honor, and a fellow ranch hand Thomas had sent for standing up as his best man. The guest list included most of the boarding house residents, Delilah's piano students and their families, and various townspeople who had befriended them both. Delilah wore a simple ivory dress that Mrs. Hoffman and 2 other women had sewn together in record time, with a crown of winter flowers in her hair. Thomas wore his best clothes, brushed and pressed within an inch of their lives, his boots polished to a shine. They spoke their vows with voices that shook with emotion, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with all the love and promise he could pour into the gesture. The reception was held at the boarding house, Mrs. Hoffman having prepared a feast that seemed impossible given the short notice. There was dancing and music, with Delilah playing piano for the first hour before others took over, so she could dance with her new husband. Thomas waltzed her around the parlor, not caring that his technique was rough, focused only on the joy radiating from her face. "Happy?" he asked as they swayed together. "Deliriously," she confirmed. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find out this was all a dream. It is real. I am real. We are real." He pulled her closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "And tonight you are going to be my wife in every way, if you are ready for that." She blushed but met his eyes steadily. "I am ready. I have been ready." They had taken a room at the boarding house for their wedding night, Mrs. Hoffman having decorated it with flowers and candles, and shooed all the other boarders to the far side of the building for privacy. When they finally escaped the reception and made their way upstairs, Thomas carried Delilah over the threshold, making her laugh. "We are already inside the house," she pointed out. "Threshold of the room counts," Thomas insisted. He set her down gently and they stood facing each other, suddenly shy despite all the kisses they had shared in the past weeks. Thomas reached out and cupped her face, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. "I love you," he said solemnly. I will love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that too." "I love you," Delilah echoed. "Thank you for saving me, for giving me a reason to live, for showing me that joy is possible even after terrible loss." "You saved me too," Thomas said. "I just did not know I needed saving until I found you." They came together slowly, undressing each other with gentle hands, exploring and learning and loving. Thomas was patient and tender, making sure Delilah was comfortable and willing at every step. When they finally joined together as husband and wife, it felt like a homecoming, like two halves of a whole finally united. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Delilah's head on Thomas's chest, his hand stroking through her hair. They talked quietly about their plans. Thomas would return to the ranch temporarily to finish out the season and save more money, while Delilah would continue teaching and save her earnings. By summer, they hoped to have enough to lease some land and start their own place. "It will be hard at first," Thomas warned. "Ranch life is not easy, especially when you are starting from nothing." "We are not starting from nothing," Delilah corrected. "We are starting from love. That is everything." Thomas tightened his arms around her, marveling at how his life had changed in the span of 6 weeks. He had gone from a drifting cowboy with no real ties or future to a married man with dreams and plans and a reason to build something lasting. All because he had found a woman crying in the Christmas snow and decided to help. No, it was more than that. All because he had found the other half of his soul and recognized her immediately, even in her darkest moment. The next months were challenging but rewarding. Thomas returned to the Triple Bar Ranch as planned, working long days and saving every penny he could. Delilah remained in Wilcox, her piano students multiplying as word of her skills spread. They saw each other every 2 weeks when Thomas could get away, and they wrote letters constantly, sharing their days and their thoughts and their love. In May, Thomas got into a fight with another ranch hand who made a crude comment about Delilah. He came away with a black eye and bruised knuckles, but the satisfaction of defending his wife's honor was worth every ache. The foreman broke up the fight and gave both men a stern talking to, but Thomas noticed a glint of approval in the older man's eyes. "You are a good husband, Irwin," the foreman said later. "Your wife is lucky to have someone who will fight for her." "I am the lucky one," Thomas replied. In June, Thomas and Delilah pooled their savings and leased a small piece of land about 5 miles outside of Wilcox. It was not much, 160 acres with a creek running through it, a run-down cabin that needed significant repairs, and grazing for maybe 50 head of cattle if they were careful. But it was theirs, or would be if they could make the payments, and they both felt like they had won the lottery. They spent every free moment fixing up the cabin, Thomas doing the heavy structural work, while Delilah cleaned and painted and made curtains from feed sacks. It was hard, exhausting work, but they did it together, and that made all the difference. By July, the cabin was livable, and Delilah moved out of the boarding house to join Thomas permanently. Their first night alone in their own home, they sat on the porch steps watching the sun set over land that was theirs to work and nurture. Thomas had his arm around Delilah's shoulders, and she leaned against him with a contented sigh. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it. We did. And this is just the beginning. I know. We still need to buy cattle, and I need to figure out how to continue teaching from out here, and there is so much work to do on the property. We will figure it all out, together." Delilah turned to look up at him, her blue eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "Do you ever think about that night, when you found me in the snow, all the time?" Thomas admitted. "I think about how easily I could have missed you, taken a different trail or ridden past without hearing you cry. I think about what my life would be like if I had not found you, and I cannot imagine it. You are everything to me, Delilah. You are everything to me, too. You saved my life that night, but you have given me so much more than just survival. You have given me hope and joy and love and a future I never dreamed possible. I know I say it all the time, but I do not think I can ever say it enough. Thank you. You do not have to thank me. Loving you is not a sacrifice or a duty. It is the greatest privilege of my life. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead, countless points of light in the vast Arizona sky. Thomas thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment: loss and grief and chance and courage and love. So much love. No more tears, only joy from now, Delilah said softly, repeating the words that had become their shared promise, their mantra. Only joy, Thomas agreed, kissing the top of her head. The first year on their own land was harder than either of them had anticipated. Thomas managed to buy 20 head of cattle at a good price, but one dry summer threatened their water supply and tested their resources. Delilah continued teaching, traveling into town twice a week to give lessons, the income crucial to their survival. They worked from dawn to dusk, fell into bed exhausted every night and woke up to do it all again, but they did it together, and that made even the hardest days bearable. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, how to work as a team, when to push and when to let the other rest. They learned that love was not just passion and romance, though they had plenty of that. It was also shared labor, quiet support, and choosing each other every single day even when things were difficult. In November, Delilah realized she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening after dinner, her hands shaking slightly as she took his and pressed them to her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said, her voice filled with wonder and fear and excitement all at once. Thomas felt like his heart might burst. "Truly, truly. I am about 2 months along, I think. The baby should come in late May or early June." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, feeling tears prick his eyes. "A baby, our baby." "Are you happy?" Delilah asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "Happy, I am over the moon, terrified but over the moon." He pulled back to look at her face. "How are you feeling? Are you well?" "Do you need to see the doctor?" She laughed at his sudden anxiety. "I am fine. A little tired, a little nauseated in the mornings, but fine. Women have been having babies since the dawn of time, Thomas. I will be all right. I am going to take care of you," he promised. "Whatever you need, whatever makes you comfortable, you just tell me." "What I need is for you to stop worrying and kiss me," Delilah said, smiling. He obliged happily, pouring all his love and joy and hope for the future into the kiss. They were going to be parents. They were going to bring a new life into the world, a child born of their love and their determination to build something good and lasting. The pregnancy progressed well, though Delilah found she could not tolerate the ride into town as easily in her condition. Her students began coming out to the ranch for lessons instead, their parents apparently trusting Thomas and Delilah enough to send their children to the remote location. It actually worked out well, as it meant Delilah could continue teaching right up until the baby came without exhausting herself with travel. Thomas became almost comically overprotective, insisting Delilah rest more, take breaks, let him handle the heavier chores. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from love, though she drew the line when he suggested she stop teaching altogether. "I need to work," she told him firmly. "Not just for the money, though that helps, but for me. Teaching is part of who I am, Thomas. I do not want to give it up. I just want you and the baby to be safe," he said. "We are safe, and we will be safer still if we have enough money to hire help during the busiest times and maybe expand the herd a bit. Let me do my part." He conceded, because she was right and because he respected her too much to try to control her decisions. They were partners in every sense of the word, and that meant trusting each other to know their own limits. As winter gave way to spring, Delilah's belly grew round and prominent. She was beautiful pregnant, Thomas thought, glowing with health and happiness. They spent long evenings planning for the baby's arrival, fixing up a corner of their single-room cabin to serve as a nursery. Thomas built a cradle from wood he had carefully selected and sanded smooth, carving their initials and the baby's expected birth month into the headboard. In late May, on a warm afternoon with the windows open to catch the breeze, Delilah's labor began. Thomas sent for the midwife who lived in town, then paced frantically while Delilah breathed through her contractions with remarkable composure. "You are supposed to be the calm one," she teased between pains. "How are you so calm?" he demanded. "One of us has to be. Besides, women have been doing this since the dawn of time." "Yes, I know," Thomas finished. "That does not make me any less terrified." The midwife arrived and took charge, shooing Thomas outside for a while before relenting and letting him stay when Delilah insisted she wanted him there. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Thomas held Delilah's hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, murmured encouragement and love as she struggled and pushed and cried out in pain. Finally, as the sun climbed high on the morning of May 28, 1884, their son was born. The midwife placed the squalling, red-faced infant in Delilah's arms, and Thomas felt his entire world shift and realign around this tiny new person. "A boy," Delilah said, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "Thomas, we have a son." "He is perfect," Thomas breathed, reaching out to touch one tiny, flailing fist. "You are perfect, both of you." They named him James after Thomas's brother who had raised him. James Irwin came into the world with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and from his first breath, he had both of them wrapped completely around his tiny fingers. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. James was a fussy baby, colicky and demanding, crying for hours on end for no reason they could discern. Thomas and Delilah took turns walking him, rocking him, singing to him. Delilah discovered that playing soft piano music soothed him, so they moved the piano Thomas had surprised her with on their first anniversary into the bedroom where James slept. Despite the exhaustion, Thomas had never been happier. Watching Delilah nurse their son, seeing the fierce love in her eyes as she held James, hearing her sing lullabies in the middle of the night, it all filled him with a profound sense of gratitude and purpose. This was what he had been meant for, he realized. Not just to drift from job to job, but to build a family, create a legacy, be part of something bigger than himself. As James grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch slowly prospered. Thomas proved to have a good eye for cattle, and their herd grew year by year. Delilah's reputation as a music teacher spread, and she had more students than she could handle, eventually training 2 other women to teach under her supervision. They were not rich by any means, but they were comfortable, able to meet their needs and even save a little. On their 3rd anniversary, Thomas took Delilah into town for dinner, leaving James with Mrs. Hoffman, who doted on him shamelessly. Over dessert, he reached across the table and took her hand. "You remember 3 years ago when I found you in the snow?" he asked. "Of course. I think about it often, actually. How lost I was, how certain I was that my life was over. And now I have everything I never knew I wanted. A husband I love more than I can express, a beautiful son, work that fulfills me, a home. You gave me all of that, Thomas." "We gave each other that," he corrected. "You could have given up. You could have chosen to stay lost in your grief, but you did not. You fought. You chose joy over tears, just like I asked you to that night." No more tears, only joy from now, Delilah said, smiling at their familiar refrain. I try to live that every day, though I admit I still have moments when the grief catches me by surprise. I miss my family, especially Emma. I wish she could have known James. I know, and it is okay to miss them, to grieve for what you lost. That is not the same as letting grief rule your life. When did you get so wise? She teased. I married a smart woman. It must have rubbed off. They laughed together, comfortable in their love and their partnership. That night they made love with the slow, deep passion of long familiarity, each knowing exactly how to bring the other pleasure. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in their bed, Delilah traced patterns on Thomas's chest. I think I might be pregnant again, she said softly. Thomas's hand stilled where it had been stroking her back. Truly, I am not certain yet, but I think so. How do you feel about that? How do I feel? Thomas rolled onto his side to face her, his hand coming up to cup her face. I feel blessed, honored, grateful beyond words. How do you feel? Excited. A little scared. James was such a difficult baby, and I am worried the next one will be the same, but mostly excited. I always wanted a big family, and it seems like we are well on our way to having one. She was right about being pregnant, and their daughter was born in December of 1886, just before Christmas. Unlike her brother, she was a calm, easy baby who slept through the night almost from the beginning. They named her Emma, after Delilah's sister, and Delilah cried happy tears when their daughter opened her eyes for the first time, revealing the same bright blue as her namesake. With 2 children under the age of 3, life became even more hectic. But it was a good kind of chaos, Thomas thought, as he watched James try to help his mother feed his baby sister, his chubby toddler hands surprisingly gentle as he held the bottle. This was what he had dreamed of in those lonely years after his brother died, a family of his own, a legacy to leave behind, people to love and be loved by. The ranch continued to grow. By 1890, they were running over 200 head of cattle and had hired 2 permanent ranch hands to help with the work. Delilah's music school had become a formal institution, with a small building in town where she and her assistant teachers gave lessons 6 days a week. They were prosperous enough now to afford nice things, new furniture for the house they had expanded over the years, books and toys for the children, a beautiful new piano that Delilah played every evening after the children were in bed. They added a 3rd child in 1889, another son they named William, and then a 4th in 1892, a daughter they called Margaret. Their family was complete, Thomas declared, and Delilah agreed with relief, for children were plenty to love and raise and provide for. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew and thrived, James becoming his father's shadow as soon as he was old enough to ride, Emma showing her mother's musical talent from an early age. William was the wild one, always getting into scrapes and adventures, while Margaret was quieter, content to sit and read or help her mother in the garden. Thomas and Delilah grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They still stole kisses in quiet moments, still made love with passion and tenderness, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. The grief that had brought them together had faded to a bittersweet memory, no longer sharp but never forgotten. They taught their children about the family members they would never know, keeping those memories alive through stories and traditions. Every Christmas Eve, Thomas and Delilah would slip away from the celebrations for a few minutes, walking hand in hand to look at the stars. It was their private ritual, a way of honoring the night they had met and the promise Thomas had made. No more tears, only joy from now, Thomas would say, as he had every year since that first Christmas. Only joy, Delilah would agree, kissing him softly. In 1895, On a cold January evening, Thomas and Delilah sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over land that had become truly theirs after years of hard work and dedication. Their children were inside, the older ones helping the younger with their homework, their voices carrying through the open door. "Can you believe it has been 12 years since we met?" Delilah asked, leaning against Thomas's shoulder. "Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days it feels like you have always been part of my life, like I cannot remember a time before you." "I know what you mean. I was thinking earlier about that night when you found me in the snow. I was so certain my life was over, that I had nothing left to live for. If someone had told me then that 12 years later I would be sitting on the porch of my own ranch, surrounded by children and love and prosperity, I would never have believed them. But you took the chance," Thomas reminded her. "When I offered you my hand, you took it. That was all it took, one decision to live instead of die, to hope instead of despair. You made it easy. You gave me a reason to hope, Thomas. You still do, every single day." He pulled her closer, kissing her temple. "I love you, Delilah Irwin. More than I did yesterday, less than I will tomorrow." "That is beautiful. Did you make that up, just now?" Inspired by you, she laughed and swatted his arm playfully. "You are ridiculous, ridiculously in love with you, yes." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. The same vast Arizona sky that had witnessed the beginning of their love story still spreading overhead. Inside, one of their children called for them, some minor crisis that needed parental intervention, and they rose together to answer the call. As they walked inside hand in hand, Thomas felt a profound sense of contentment wash over him. This was his life, messy and loud and chaotic and absolutely perfect. He had a wife he adored, children who were healthy and happy, work that satisfied him, and enough prosperity to provide for his family's needs and a few of their wants. It had all started on a snowy Christmas Eve, with a woman crying in the snow and a cowboy who refused to let her give up. From that moment of connection, of compassion and courage, had grown something beautiful and lasting. They had built a life together brick by brick, day by day, choosing love and joy over grief and despair. Years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of their children's lives. James grew into a fine young man, taking over more of the ranch operations as Thomas began to slow down. Emma's musical talent blossomed, and she began teaching at her mother's school. William, true to form, left home at 18 to seek adventure, though he wrote faithfully every month and visited when he could. Margaret married a banker's son from Tucson, a good man who treated her well and loved her dearly. Thomas and Delilah became grandparents in 1908, when Emma gave them a grandson she named Thomas in honor of the grandfather who doted on him. More grandchildren followed over the years, the ranch house filling with young voices and laughter during family gatherings. In 1915, on a warm spring afternoon, Thomas and Delilah celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and friends. The party was held at the ranch, tables set up in the yard, food and drink abundant. As the sun began to set, Thomas stood and called for everyone's attention. "I want to say a few words," he began, his voice still strong despite his 62 years. 30 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known. It was the smartest decision I ever made, though I cannot really take credit for it. Loving Delilah has always been as natural as breathing." He looked at his wife, who was smiling up at him with tears in her eyes. "We met on Christmas Eve of 1883 in the middle of a snowstorm that had no business being in Arizona. Delilah had lost everything: her family, her home, her hope. She was ready to give up, to let the cold take her. But I found her, And I told her something that has become the foundation of our life together. No more tears, only joy from now. There was a murmur of recognition from those who had heard the story before, and curious attention from the younger grandchildren who had not. "The thing is," Thomas continued, "I did not know when I said those words how true they would become. Oh, we have had our share of hardship and struggle. There have been difficult years and painful losses. But through it all, we have chosen joy. We have chosen love. We have chosen each other every single day for 30 years." He raised his glass. "To my wife, Delilah Irwin, the strongest, kindest, most loving person I know. Thank you for taking my hand that night in the snow. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for 30 years of joy." "To Delilah," the gathered crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Delilah stood and crossed to Thomas, wrapping her arms around him and kissing him to the cheers and laughter of their family. When she pulled back, she was crying, though her smile was radiant. "Only joy," she whispered, just for him. "Only joy," he agreed. As the party continued around them, their children and grandchildren laughing and talking and celebrating, Thomas and Delilah slipped away for a private moment. They walked to the same rise where Thomas had first declared his love all those years ago, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. "You have any regrets?" Delilah asked, leaning against his side. Thomas considered the question seriously. "Not a single one. Every decision I made, every path I took led me to you. How could I regret that? What about the hard times? The years when we barely scraped by, when we did not know if the ranch would make it? Those were the times that taught us what we were made of. They were not easy, but we survived them together. That is what matters." Delilah nodded, content with his answer. "I used to have nightmares, you know, about that Christmas Eve, about what would have happened if you had not found me. I would dream I was still out there in the snow, freezing, alone. But I did find you, and you have never been alone since. I know. The nightmares stopped years ago. Now when I dream about that night, it is different. I dream about the moment I first saw you, heard your voice telling me it would be all right. I dream about the promise you made and how you have kept it every day since." Thomas pulled her closer, feeling the comfortable weight of her against his side. They fit together perfectly after all these years, two puzzle pieces that had found their match. "I meant what I said at the party. Loving you has always been as natural as breathing. You are my home, Delilah. You always have been." "And you are mine," she replied. "My home, my heart, my everything." They stood together as darkness fell, the stars emerging overhead one by one. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of their family still celebrating, the voices of children and grandchildren raised in laughter and song. It was a symphony of joy, the direct result of one decision made 32 years ago on a snowy Christmas Eve, the decision to live, to love, to choose hope over despair. As they walked back toward the lights and warmth of their home, Thomas thought about the long, winding road that had led them here. All the hardship and struggle, all the moments of doubt and fear, all the risks they had taken and chances they had embraced, every bit of it had been worth it to build this life, this family, this love. He looked at Delilah walking beside him, her hand secure in his, her face peaceful and content. She had come so far from the broken woman crying in the snow. She had rebuilt herself from nothing, finding strength and purpose and joy in the ruins of her old life. And she had let him be part of that journey, let him share in her rebuilding and her triumph. "Thank you," he said suddenly. Delilah looked up at him, confused. "For what?" "For taking my hand that night, for trusting me, for loving me. For this," he gestured toward the house where their family waited, "all of this." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for not riding past, for hearing me. For caring whether I lived or died. For keeping your promise." "No more tears, only joy from now," Thomas said, the familiar words of benediction. "Only joy," Delilah agreed. They walked the rest of the way in silence, content in each other's presence and the life they had built together. When they reached the house, their family swept them back into the celebration, and they were pulled into conversations and laughter, and the chaotic warmth of being surrounded by those they loved. Later that night, after the guests had gone, and the children and grandchildren had either retired to their rooms or headed home, Thomas and Delilah prepared for bed in the comfortable routine of long marriage. As they settled under the covers, Delilah curled against Thomas's side, her head on his shoulder. "I love you," she murmured, already half asleep. "I love you too," Thomas replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. He lay awake for a while after she had fallen asleep, listening to her steady breathing, feeling the weight of her against him. He thought about the frightened, grief-stricken woman he had found in the snow all those years ago, and the strong, accomplished woman sleeping peacefully beside him now. He thought about their children and grandchildren, the legacy they had created together, the good they had done in the world simply by choosing love and refusing to give up. It had not been easy. There had been times when they struggled, when money was tight and worry kept them awake at night. There had been losses, friends and neighbors who had died, cattle lost to disease or drought, dreams that had to be adjusted or abandoned. There had been arguments and misunderstandings, moments when they had hurt each other without meaning to, times when they had to work hard to remember why they had chosen each other in the first place. But through it all, they had honored that first promise. No more tears, only joy from now. They had chosen to focus on what they had rather than what they lacked, to celebrate small victories rather than dwell on defeats, to find happiness in simple moments, a sunrise watched together, a child's laughter, the comfort of familiar touch. Thomas finally drifted off to sleep, content and grateful and deeply, profoundly happy. He dreamed of snow falling on the Arizona desert, of a woman with blue eyes and a heart full of grief, of the moment he had reached out his hand and she had taken it. In the dream, as in life, that single gesture changed everything, opening a door to a future neither of them could have imagined but both had worked to create. The years continued to pass with increasing speed, as they always do for those fortunate enough to grow old together. Thomas and Delilah watched their children raise their own families, passing down the values and lessons they themselves had learned through hard experience. They saw the ranch continue to thrive under James's management, saw Emma's music school become an institution in Wilcox that would outlast them both, saw William finally settle down with a wife and family of his own in California, saw Margaret's children grow up happy and healthy. In 1920, they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary with another large gathering, though this one was marked by the absence of several old friends who had passed away. They were 73 and 67 respectively, both showing their age but still active and engaged with life. Thomas still rode every day when the weather was good, checking on cattle and mending fences. Delilah still taught piano twice a week, her hands stiff with arthritis, but still capable of coaxing beautiful music from the keys. "We are getting old," Delilah observed one evening as they sat on the porch, a ritual they had maintained for decades. "We are," Thomas agreed. "How do you feel about that?" "Grateful. So many people do not get the chance to grow old with the person they love. We have been blessed, Thomas." "That we have." He reached over and took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles in a familiar caress. "Any regrets?" "Still none." "You?" "Not a single one." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge as they had done countless times before. The desert had not changed much over the decades. It remained harsh and beautiful, unforgiving and magnificent. But they had changed, growing from young newlyweds trying to survive into established members of the community, pillars who were respected and loved by all who knew them. "Do you think about heaven?" Delilah asked suddenly. Thomas considered the question. "Sometimes. Why?" "I was just thinking that whenever I die, I hope I see my parents and Emma again. I hope I get to introduce them to you and our children. I hope they know how happy I have been, how full my life has been despite losing them." "I am sure they know," Thomas said gently. "I am sure they have been watching over you all these years, glad to see you living and thriving. I like to think so." She squeezed his hand. "But I am not in any hurry to find out. I still have too much living to do here with you." "Good. Because I am not ready to let you go yet. I figure we have at least another 20 years together." Delilah laughed. "That would make you 93. I do not know if either of us will last that long. Then we will take whatever time we get and make the most of it, just like we always have." They did make the most of their remaining years together. Thomas lived to see his 80th birthday in 1927, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Delilah threw him a party that became the stuff of legend in Wilcox, with over 100 people showing up to honor the man who had become a respected figure in the community. At the party, Thomas stood to make a speech, his voice thinner than it had been but still steady. "I want to thank you all for coming today and for being part of my life. I have been blessed beyond measure with a wife I love more than life itself, with children who have made me proud, with work that has given me purpose, and with friends who have stood by me through thick and thin." He paused, looking around at all the faces watching him with affection and respect. "But more than anything, I want to thank the woman who has been by my side for 42 years. Delilah, you have been my partner, my love, my anchor, and my inspiration. Everything good in my life stems from the moment I found you in that Christmas snow, and you decided to take my hand and live." There was not a dry eye in the house as Thomas raised his glass. "To my wife, who taught me that joy is a choice we make every day, to choosing joy today and always." "To Joy," the crowd echoed. Delilah crossed to him, tears streaming down her face, and kissed him deeply to the cheers of their family and friends. "I love you, Thomas Irwin," she said. "Thank you for 42 years of joy." "Only joy," he replied, their familiar refrain taking on new weight given their advanced age and the uncertain time they had left. Thomas died peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night in 1929. Just a month shy of his 82nd birthday. Delilah found him in the morning, still warm, his face peaceful. She sat with him for a long time, holding his hand and talking to him as if he could still hear her, telling him all the things she wanted him to know, how much she loved him, how grateful she was for their life together, how she would miss him every day but would not let grief consume her as it once had. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Thomas had touched over the decades. His children spoke movingly about his kindness, his strength, his unwavering love for their mother. Emma played piano, the music a tribute to the man who had encouraged her talent from the time she was small. James, now running the ranch with his own sons, spoke about his father's integrity and work ethic, the values he had instilled that would live on for generations. Delilah sat through it all with quiet dignity, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She cried, but they were tears of grief mixed with gratitude, grief for the loss, gratitude for the years they had shared. When it was her turn to speak, she stood at the front of the church and looked out at all the faces watching her with sympathy and love. "My husband saved my life," she said simply. "Not just on the night we met, though he did that too. But every day after, for 43 years, he saved me by choosing to love me, to build a life with me, to show me that joy was possible even after terrible loss. He made a promise to me on the night we met: no more tears, only joy from now. And he kept that promise every single day. Her voice broke, but she steadied herself. Thomas is gone now, and I will miss him more than words can express. But I will not dishonor his memory by giving in to despair. I will keep living, keep choosing joy, keep sharing the love he taught me with our children and grandchildren. That is how I will honor him, by living the way he showed me, by being grateful for what I had rather than destroyed by what I have lost. She looked at the simple wooden casket that held the man she had loved for more than 4 decades. Thank you, my love, for everything. I will see you again when my time comes. Until then, I will do my best to make you proud. There was not a dry eye in the church. Delilah lived another 8 years after Thomas died, remaining active and engaged despite her grief. She continued teaching piano until her hands simply would not cooperate anymore, then shifted to mentoring younger teachers and overseeing her music school from a distance. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, making sure his memory stayed alive and vibrant. Every Christmas Eve, she would bundle up and walk out to the rise where Thomas had first told her he loved her. She would stand there looking at the stars, remembering that long ago Christmas when her life had changed forever, and she would say the words aloud, "No more tears, only joy from now." And then she would smile, because despite the tears of grief, there was still so much joy. The joy of being surrounded by family, of seeing her grandchildren grow and thrive, of music and beauty, and the enduring legacy of a love that had transformed 2 lives and created ripples that extended far beyond either of them. Delilah Sinclair Irwin died peacefully in her sleep on December 23, 1937, just 2 days before the 54th anniversary of the night Thomas had found her crying in the Christmas snow. Her children found her in the morning with a smile on her face, her hands folded peacefully over her chest. On her bedside table was an old photograph of Thomas, taken on their wedding day, and a note in her shaky handwriting. It read simply, "No more tears, only joy from now. I kept my promise, my love. Now I am coming home to you." She was buried next to Thomas on the ranch they had built together, on a rise overlooking land that their family still worked and tended. At her funeral, Emma played the same piece Delilah had played at Thomas's service, and James spoke about the legacy of love and resilience his parents had left behind. They met in the worst possible circumstances, James told the gathered mourners. My mother had lost everything. My father was a drifting cowboy with no real ties or future. But they chose each other, and they chose joy, and from that choice came all of this. He gestured to the assembled family, dozens of descendants spanning 4 generations, all of us. We exist because 2 people decided to love each other and build a life together, no matter how hard it was, no matter what obstacles they faced. He looked at his mother's casket, his eyes bright with tears. Thank you, Mama, for showing us what real love looks like. Thank you for choosing joy, even when it would have been easier to choose despair. Thank you for being the heart of our family. We will miss you, but we will keep your legacy alive by loving each other the way you and Papa loved each other fiercely, faithfully, and forever. The family gathered at the ranch after the funeral, sharing stories and memories, laughing through their tears at favorite anecdotes. The children and grandchildren spoke about lessons learned, values instilled, the way Thomas and Delilah's love had shaped them all. They talked about the importance of choosing joy, of not letting grief or hardship destroy you, of building something lasting through dedication and partnership. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in brilliant colors, the entire family gathered at the grave site one last time. They stood in a circle around the 2 headstones, holding hands, forming a living testament to the love that had started it all. Emma, now in her 50s and a grandmother herself, began to sing a hymn that Delilah had loved. One by one, the others joined in, their voices rising into the evening air. When the song ended, they stood in silence for a moment, honoring the couple who had given them life and love and the courage to choose joy. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, they all turned and walked back toward the ranch house together, supporting each other, united by the bonds of family and the legacy of a love story that had begun on a snowy Christmas Eve and lasted through eternity. Thomas and Delilah were gone, but they lived on in every child and great-grandchild who carried their genes and their values. They lived on in the ranch that still prospered, in the music school that still taught children to love beauty and art, in the stories passed down through generations. They lived on in the simple phrase that had become a family motto: no more tears, only joy from now. And so the story that began with a cowboy finding a woman crying in the Christmas snow ended not with death, but with life abundant, joyful, enduring life that continued to ripple outward long after its originators had passed on. It was a story of love conquering grief, of hope overcoming despair, of two people choosing each other and building something beautiful from the ashes of loss. It was a story with a happy ending that never really ended at all, because true love, the kind that commits and perseveres and chooses joy, even in hardship, that kind of love lasts forever, echoing through time and touching lives far into the future. Thomas and Delilah's love was that kind of love, and their story would be told and retold for generations to come, inspiring others to choose joy, to take chances on love, to believe that even in our darkest moments, salvation might be just around the corner if we are brave enough to reach for it.